Hey, folks, welcome to our next episode of The Main Scoop. I'm Greg Lotko. I'm joined by my co-host, Daniel Newman. Nice to see you.
Greg, it's good to be back. Love being here with you on The Main Scoop. So much to talk about. Tech industry is ripping and roaring. Changes are everywhere, whether it's from the cloud, whether it's security, whether it's AI, whether it's the mainframe. Greg, there's never a lack of things for us to talk about here on the show.
I agree. So let's get into today's topic. Let's talk about cloud and focus on that. Do we believe it's at an inflection point? We see a lot going on relative to cloud adoption and modernization, but are we at an inflection point?
Well, I think we have settled to some extent. Now, vernacular is fluid, Greg, but you got hybrid multi, you've got varying definitions of multi. You got some people that multi is multiple hyperscaler. Others say multi is multiple clouds. It could include private and edge and telco and everything else. But what we have hit is a point where I think largely the world agrees that not every workload is going to the public cloud, and everyone also agrees that not everything's staying on-prem. So we are at an inflection, but now it's sort of almost coming down to a conversation, Greg, about distribution, meaning every organization, every entity is kind of looking across a continuum of on-prem to hyperscale and public clouds and saying, where do our workloads live across this continuum?
And I think it's funny, right? Because I asked if we're at an inflection point. We're talking about cloud, and then you could easily jump down into a litany of a list of ways to refer to cloud, ways to refer to the different environments. And the idea that, not everybody is going there with everything. That's why we ended up having to talk about and have the term hybrid, right? About where different workloads are going to be. When we talk about modernization now, we're not talking about cloud or some endpoint of the cloud being the way to modernize. We're talking about modernizing IT, and we're talking about it holistically across your whole IT environment.
Yeah, so I think what we will see is we'll see different industries. You're going to see different kind of industry-led clouds. You're going to see companies continually coming to a sort of set of conclusions. And I think it's going to be very fluid. I don't think it's going to be like, oh my gosh, we have the final destination is going to be 81% of our workloads will be here and 19%. I think it's going to be very dependent. You're going to have global data, you're going to have data residency, sovereignty, compliance. You're going to have this AI boom. You're going to have security, privacy. These are all going to play a role, Greg. And I think what would be amazing is perhaps bringing in someone that literally spends all their time, all day long, thinking about the cloud.
I agree. And I think we've set it up so that the conversation isn't about cloud being everything as much as it is about modernization and modernizing IT environments. But absolutely, let's pull in David Linthicum. He's from Deloitte. He's Chief Cloud Strategy Officer, so he's got it right there in his title. And he's also an author and a cloud thought leader. So, David, let's pull you in here. Tell us what you're thinking about relative to modernization. And is it all about cloud or?
No, modernization is the ability to put workloads on the platforms where they're going to be mostly fully optimized. And so that can't be force fit cloud. Sometimes it's edge and IoT, traditional mainframe systems, traditional core systems, and those could be in colos or managed service providers or even on traditional data centers. And so the big thing now is trying to get technologists to open their minds up and close their magazines.
We've had a lot of people in the industry that had a cloud first mindset, but what you're saying is that it's about the data, it's about the workloads, it's about the business, right? Have a business first application, what it is you're trying to accomplish as the first mindset, right?
Yeah, how can it be any other way? I mean, sometimes I get frustrated when people lead with technologies. In other words, they're trying to move to a cloud migration project. They're calling someone, after a cloud provider that this is where they're moving to, and they don't understand the issues around their own workloads and what the profiles are there, and have done a true triage as to where these applications should exist. In many instances, they should exist on public cloud providers because of the attributes of those applications, the economies of running them, the ability to scale up and scale down, and lots of things that cloud providers provide. But if you're dealing with very simple, repeatable processes and very, static and slow growing storage loads, then on-premise systems may be a better opportunity. If you're getting into high-performance computing, those still may be on-premise is a better opportunity, dealing with, legal and compliance issues as far as localizing the systems and data sovereignty stuff. And so all these things kind of really come to bear in your ability to kind of pick the platforms where they need to run. And one of the things we need to do as technologists is open our mind as to what they are, understanding the attributes, and understand we're going to make these decisions downstream of the understanding the requirements and what the data sets and what the workloads are.
So David, you heard me sort of in the preamble, and I talked a little bit about sort of this continuum. And we talk to, as analysts, hundreds of CIOs every year, not to mention all the vendors, and we kind of do the back and forth. And I think there was a time when it was like, oh my gosh, everything's going to the public cloud. And I think thankfully we've come to our senses, and I think hybrid has kind of become a bit of a panacea. And I say hybrid multi because it's almost like people want to call them different things, and in some ways it might be if you're using one public cloud and you're using one on-prem, but that's really not the reality of any enterprise anymore. And so people have kind of gotten to this, like, hybrid is the panacea. You spend a lot of time, at Deloitte, you're spending time consulting and working closely with the world's largest enterprises on building an operating model around cloud. I have to imagine that's a big part of what you do. What are you finding is the reality as you kind of help these companies finding their way? What are they learning? Is hybrid the panacea?
Yeah, it's really the fact that we're not trying to back ourselves into an existing architecture. I agree with you 100% that we're moving into a hybrid multi kind of environment. And so we're dealing with more plural public cloud providers, as well as perhaps leftover private clouds on the enterprise space and traditional systems and even cores. And the ability to kind of, and edge computing and IoT really come into play there. And the ability to kind of make all these things work and play well together really seems to be the challenges that enterprises are facing now. And there's really kind of two tiers there. In other words, how do we mitigate the complexity that we're building to make these things work at a rate that's going to bring the maximum amount of value back to the business? It's the old IT problem, and opening our minds about the solutions to make it happen. The other issue you brought up was the ability to deal with culture and people, in understanding how this stuff is going to work, and understanding that it's not going to be one direction. It's not going to be as simple as that. We're going to move in a variety of different directions. And that's for the benefit of the business. And we have to set up our operating models, to set up our cultures, set up our skill sets, set up a skills array around making that happen moving forward.
I think it's really interesting there when you talk about opening up, and I think about everything we talk about in the technology space. It's opening up processes, people, and technology, right? So we think about opening up with APIs or using open source capabilities. It is opening up people's minds to the awareness of what's out there, the capabilities of different platforms and different technologies, opening up those workloads and allowing them to interconnect so that you're leveraging the best technology for the best piece of the problem, but tying it together in an efficient and effective way to reduce complexity, but leverage the power and strength of the different platforms at the same time.
Yeah, it's absolutely got to be that way, because I think we've understood for the last 40 years as IT's kind of progressed and evolved, that it's never going to be moving into one particular direction that's going to be a panacea for the application, hosting, and system. It's going to be a large variety of weapons that we have in our arsenal that we're able to deploy in certain situations. Cloud really kind of added lots of good weapons in how we store data and advanced analytics and some of the AI processing and reasons why we want to put things there. But every system and every deployment pattern is really going to have a value. And your ability to kind of make all these things work and play well together, and also understanding that we're, coming from an environment, we have an as-is state, considering what those are and moving to the to-be state and how much cost and risk it's going to put upon us. All those things need to be considered. And so it gets down to the answer that people hate from consultants. It depends. It depends on your as-is state. It depends on your workloads. It depends on your security profile, your industry. All these really
what you're trying to accomplish.
What you're trying to accomplish, right? To get to something that's going to be, close to being fully optimized as we can. And I tell this to people all the time. I can solve most problems with any technology. If I have enough, if I have enough time. But the reality is I'm only going to find one solution that's going to be as close to being 100% optimized as I can. We're never going to be 100% optimized. We're getting close. So what is that solution? What does that configuration look like? And how are we going to make these things, kind of work and play well to, get to the core reason we exist, to put value back into the business and provable value. We're not just giving them a configuration that we think is right, but I can mathematically prove that this is something that's going to be close to being fully optimized versus the other 1,000, 10 factorial solution patterns that we have, which all work, by the way. That's where it gets dangerous because people say, well, it works. It may work, but it's costing you 100% more per year to maintain and operate these systems. We got to start thinking that way, start thinking in kind of a selfish way to make sure that we're maximizing the investment in terms of the value that's coming back to the business.
So David, the only person that likes to say it depends more than a consultant is an analyst, by the way. So, and I also start all my sentences by saying, I believe, because that way, you're never too definitive. But in all serious, like, how do you get a customer to make those decisions? Like, okay, you can say it depends, but at some point it depends on something. You take them through a process and then they ultimately do have to place the workload. So how do you kind of work them through that process of saying, is it cost? Is it agility long-term? Is it, do you have to match it to some sort of business strategy document? Is it the corporate earnings promises that they've made to their shareholders? Like, what drives the ultimate placement of that workload?
I think it really kind of comes down to soft and hard values. One of the things we just did at Deloitte, we did a study to look at digital transformations as it relates to the value of the business. And we found there's a direct correlation with people who are successful with digital transformations, as it relates to increasing the value of the business, which means that basically if you automate better and innovate better, you're going to, have a business is going to be more valuable. Who'd have thunk that? This is really about hard and soft values, number one. And I think that's where we kind of went off kilter first with cloud. In other words, we went to hard values, which were discernible operational cost savings that we could create from cloud, which were very hard to find, by the way, and hard to find now. And then the soft values, and looking at each workload with those kind of lenses. If you get into multiple metrics where you're looking at agility and different metrics and things like that, this is a little bit more easier to understand. So if I put this workload on this particular platform, how much hard value, operational cost savings are going to come back over the years, and how much soft value I'm able to create, agility, the ability to move quicker, the ability to fund innovation, all those sorts of things. And looking at just those two dimensions, it's pretty apparent as to where these platforms or where these application and workloads and data sets should reside. And the next thing also, and we just hit upon it earlier, is the culture of the organization. I mean, sometimes organizations, they can't handle the cloud, to quote a few good men. And so your ability to kind of understand a cultural ability to get into this series of stuff, your skill sets, your operational capabilities, all those things are germane to this, because in many instances, I may find the perfect platform or an application workload and a data set that's going to provide the best value back to the business. They may not know how to operate it, have the skills around to make it happen, or even are going to maintain it fully moving forward because they just don't have the culture to make that happen.
Back to your few good men there, sometimes businesses, they can't handle the truth. They know in their deepest, darkest hearts, they want a mainframe running somewhere in the background because they know it's not going to go down. It's going to do those high throughput, those high workloads, the chatty workloads that are interacting with storage a lot. Really good conversation. Makes a lot of sense.
Greg, I see a skit in the future of an SKO where you're like, keep the workload on the mainframe. You can't handle the cloud, like something like that. It's gonna have to come out, and then you'll have to give David a cheer at some point in front of an audience, and I'm sure he won't mind that. So, this is the main scoop. And so one of the things, David, is you work with a lot of highly regulated industry clients. That all of the kind of rhetoric about mainframe's still massively critical in many industries. It's still a huge business. It's still very important. It seems that there's a lot of work being done on finding ways to have mainframe and cloud work very interoperably and very interdependently. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in your role as the relationship between mainframe and what's becoming this kind of hybrid and multi-cloud architecture of most enterprises.
Yeah, it's fairly easy. It's the ability to have these things work and play well together. And that's always should have been on the radar screen. In many instances, they were looking at it, cloud as a replacement strategy for existing mainframe systems, and it was really kind of more or less an augmentation strategy. And so again, to the workload stuff, if we find that some workloads are going to be better to run in the cloud and some better on the mainframe, then you really kind of need to focus on the connective tissue and in between these two environments and make sure they seamlessly are able to work together, understanding that that either isn't going to go away. And so your strategy should be coexistence. Your strategy should be co-valuing. Your strategy should be the ability to take advantage of each platform's capabilities, and not focused on, a migration strategy or a sunsetting strategy. We're never going to have everything fully on cloud. We're never going to have things fully on premise anymore. So what does that environment look like? Well, that looks like your ability to have a consistent control plane in dealing with security and dealing with management and dealing with data and dealing with metadata and dealing with governance, and the ability not necessarily to deal with each of these silos on their terms, but the ability to deal with all the various capabilities using a common layer of technology that sits above the various systems that we're running to make these things in essence more valuable. Because who knows if you're getting your data from a mainframe? It's transparent to you as a customer.
Doesn't matter as long as you're getting it. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you're getting it. And your ability to kind of operate these things under the same consistent logic, the same consistent technology, security, governance, things like that, is really going to be the next problem to solve over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to frame it, David. I'd love to spend the last couple of minutes we have together here to just kind of look into the future. 6 months ago, 7 months ago, most of the industry didn't see generative AI coming on with such a rapid onset, meaning I think we all knew. I mean, people keep talking about it's like Google Workspace has been finishing my sentences on my emails for like 2 years now. So this isn't really new, and we've all been doing a little multi-turn.
You don't finish your own sentences, but Google does.
Well, that's why I lost the capability. I'm slowly but surely deteriorating to nothing more than Danbot. You saw I launched an AI. I eventually intend to just sit here and let the technology work for me. But in serious, David, that's one example of what I would say is a bullish trend for hybrid, because things like governance and compliance and security and privacy are going to drive companies to want to build foundational models and generative tools, but they're not necessarily going to want to put it all into the public cloud without a lot of assurances that that data is going to be walled from being utilized for training future LLMs, et cetera, et cetera. But I'd love to just get your take. What are the drivers in your mind that are going to make hybrid and multi-cloud an even more rapidly onset investment and adoption across the enterprise?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's pervasiveness of data and your ability to leverage information and data where it best resides, but also your ability to leverage this data in a way that doesn't necessarily force relocation of information. In other words, data virtualization, abstraction, all these sorts of things kind of really come into play. And so as we move into the generative AI stuff, we have a couple of problems to solve. Number one, we have a massive amount of storage and processing needs to occur to make these things run. And you can do that a couple of ways. Number one, you can run on the cloud and pay the processing and storage bills to make that happen. But in many instances, on-prem systems that are going to have static costs, and certainly dealing with cheaper storage devices in many instances, are going to be a much better economical way to do that. Also, you have compliance issues to deal with. Those come along, PII information. And also, we're getting into this whole thing, your ability to derive information from anonymized information to become PIIs. In other words, we have the capabilities now with some of these AI engines. We're able to take a multitude of very complex data sets, and where they're into themselves really don't violate any laws. Your ability to aggregate these things, and using a generative AI engine to understand the essence of what they are and assemble them into PII is becoming an issue now as well. So what do you do with that? So this really is about, to the previous problem, looking at where we should optimize the data and where it should exist, and also where you need to have the data exist around the privacy and ethical concerns that are coming up. And that seems to be, something that's off everybody's radars.
Well, Greg, did you want the truth?
I can handle the truth.
But can you handle the cloud truth? That is TBD.
I can handle the cloud truth. I recognize that a hybrid cloud is made up of on-prem, off-prem, multi-cloud, distributed workloads, mainframe. It's all about all
your
your IT
smartwatch, your phone,
together.
your car, your
All of it.
TV. It's all
Yeah.
anything we can connect to, process, and store information is going to be part of what that is.
And it's only going to get faster. The data is going to be exponential, and it's going to force all of us to be thinking about all the great insights, David, that you provided today. Greg, you provided a couple as well. But David, I want to thank you so much. This is a really important topic. And while we do like to smile and have a laugh here and occasionally try to get into character of very historical, relevant movies, the transition we're making is going to be substantial. It's going to continue to happen more quickly, and companies, whether large or small, are going to need to be really thinking about the architecture of choice to be able to deliver on the promise of data, keep their data secure, offer applications for the next generation. And David, really want to just say thanks for joining the Main Scoop, and thank you so much for the expertise that you provided us here today.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you inviting me on.
Thanks a lot, David.
All right, everybody, there you have it. That's it for this episode of The Main Scoop. Hit that subscribe button. We would love to have you join us for each and every episode. We promise to keep it fresh and keep it interesting. But for this episode, for Greg Locko and myself, it's time to say goodbye. We'll see you all later.